If I were to ask you all to objectively answer who is the most important Templar in Assassin's Creed, chances are I'd get a lot of completely different answers. Is it Rodrigo Borgia, who controlled the church during the Renaissance? Maybe it's Haytham Kenway, who led the Templars in America. Or could it be Warren Vidic, who created the Animus? Depending on who you ask, you are likely to get a completely different answer. However, if I were to ask you who the most important assassin in the franchise is, apart from the actual founders of the Order, most people, if they look at it from an unbiased perspective, would answer Altair. Altair is the one who reformed the entire Brotherhood, updated its practices, eliminated many of the bad habits the Brotherhood had developed, wrote a codex to guide future generations, wielded and mastered a piece of Eden, gained extensive knowledge on the Isu and the world around him, and ultimately gave his life for the Brotherhood. Without him, the Assassin Brotherhood likely would have died out, so he's basically responsible for every assassin after him existing. But what if I told you there was a Templar who essentially did the same exact thing for their order? Well, if there was such a Templar, surely they would be the greatest member of the Templar Order. And surprisingly, there is one, and his name is Jacques de Molay. Most people probably recognize him from the beginning of Assassin's Creed Unity, where he's captured by the French and eventually put to death. From what we see, he doesn't exactly seem that impressive. He basically just gets captured and killed. But in reality, Molay is the reason why the Templars survived their downfall and eventually became even more powerful and dangerous. To better understand just how important Molay was, we have to look at the state of the Templar Order during his time. In the Assassin's Creed universe, you technically have two versions of the Templar Order. The first is the one we all know. They're the quote-unquote bad guys of the series, the villains who are the main antagonists in most of the games. The second Templar Order is based on the real-life Knights Templar, the organization that was famous during the Crusades. Now, within the AC universe, the bad guys realized that they needed the support of the church to better achieve their goals. After all, during this time period, religion was so influential. So they became a public Christian military order and were extremely successful. They gained massive amounts of wealth, influence, and manpower, while their true secret bad guy goals remained hidden from the public and the vast majority of their members. And you actually see a very similar system with Abstergo in the modern day. To the public, Abstergo is simply a massive corporation that provides products and services to consumers. However, behind that public image are the true goals of the private Templar Order, or the bad guys. Not everyone working at Abstergo is actually aware of this. Most employees are simply normal workers who have no idea that the Templars even exist. Anyways, Molay was the Grand Master of both the public and private Templar Order during this time. And there's actually something very important about Molay. He was a sage, essentially a reincarnation of the Isu Aida. And surprisingly, Molay was very different from the other sages that we see throughout the series. As we know, the memories of the Isu manifest differently in every sage, but Molay seems to be one of the only sages in the franchise where his Isu identity didn't overshadow who he was as a person or a Templar. Most other sages, especially Aida ones, are heavily influenced by Aida's memories and personality, sometimes to the point where they're solely driven by Aida's goals. Molay, however, seemed to be very different. He possessed Aida's knowledge, but he still appeared wholeheartedly dedicated to the Templar cause. Because of this, Molay was able to lead the Templar Order to the absolute height of its power, something that the Assassin's Creed Unity database explicitly states. And during this time, he wrote a codex called the Codex of the Father of Understanding. In it, Molay wrote down key things he knew about the Isu and outlined reforms for the Templar Order he'd like to see, making it very similar to Altair's own codex. Molay's vision for the Templar Order was very different from what it currently was. He still believed that Templars should control the world, but instead of relying on monarchs and aristocrats, he believed the Templars should primarily control society through finances and capitalism. And ironically, this philosophy would become very important to the Templars centuries later. Now let's look at both real-life history and Assassin's Creed history, and let's combine them to form the narrative. The King of France, Philip IV, was dealing with serious financial problems due to his ongoing wars with England, and on top of this, he owed the public Templar Order a massive amount of money. Behind the scenes, the assassin secretly helped put Pope Clement V into power. The Pope eventually asked the various military orders their opinions on launching another crusade and merging their organizations together, likely to be more powerful. Molay was strongly against this idea, probably because merging the orders would have made it harder to maintain the Templars' secret goals. King Philip, however, loved the idea, especially the part of having all of these orders answered directly directly to him. This would also give him the opportunity to disband the Templars and seize their wealth for himself. And unfortunately for Molay, the Templar Order was already in a weakened position. The assassins and their allies had been fighting them for years, and Altair had recently reformed the Brotherhood, making the assassins far more deadly due to their new practices and beliefs. All of this put immense stress on the Templars. Eventually, this led to the events we see at the beginning of Assassin's Creed Unity. King Philip and his allies fabricated charges against the public Templar Order, beginning a nationwide purge that extended across countries, where Templars were arrested, captured, and even killed. The assassins even disguised themselves as mercenaries to help Philip's men capture Molay. During the attack, Molay realized that the Templar Order was only moments away from completely collapsing, so he did two very important things. He ordered his advisor to hide the Codex and the Sword of Eden, and we'll come back to the Sword of Eden later, because there's actually an entire story on how Molay was one of the only people, besides a certain Joan of Arc, who knew how to properly wield it. Eventually, Molay was captured and imprisoned for 7 years, and as you can imagine, his imprisonment was terrible. He was subjected to brutal conditions and torture. While outside the prison, the public Templar Order was officially abolished and many of the members were executed. But Molay was not going to let the order die. During his imprisonment, he passed the knowledge of the true Templar bad guy cause down to 9 of his most trusted men, ensuring that the secret ancient order would survive even after the public organization was destroyed. He gave them knowledge on the Isu, the secrets of the order, and the assassins. Molay expected to die, but his priority was to make sure that the order itself lived on. However, there was an unexpected twist. Instead of sentencing Molay and the remaining Templars to death, the Cardinals decided to give him life in prison. Molay realized that this was terrible because if he remained in prison, there was a big chance the Templars could eventually be discovered and traced back to him. If he died, it would appear that the order was truly dead. Molay knew what he needed to do, so he deliberately fanned the flames. He publicly and proudly declared that he and the Templars were guilty, but not of the crimes they had been accused of, but for betraying the order to save their own lives. This enraged the king, and the very same day that Molay did that, Philip ordered Molay to be burned alive, even refusing to wait for the Cardinals' ruling. With Molay's death, the public Templar Order in Europe collapsed, and many of its surviving members went on to do different things. For example, joining different military orders. Imagine if Abstergo the company collapsed and every important known Templar was eliminated. It's kind of the same thing, but at that time. You can see why the assassins celebrated and continued wiping out the survivors wherever they could find them. Now that we've done a crash course on Molay's life, we have to look at his legacy and everything he ultimately impacted. Much like how Altair reformed the assassins, Molay wanted to do something very similar for the Templars. The biggest difference is that he was never able to properly implement his reforms. Altair spent years traveling around the world and spreading his new ideals to other assassin brotherhoods. Molay, on the other hand, was captured and imprisoned before he could actually put what he imagined into practice. However, a couple of centuries later, another French Templar named Germain would do some important stuff. Germain was also a sage, and the visions he experienced eventually led him to understand Molay. After all, they kind of have the same memories. He eventually did discover Molay's hidden codex. After reading it, Germain became heavily inspired by Molay and attempted to make the French Templars follow his teachings. Germain believed that removing power from the monarchs and instead running a society based around capitalism and economics would make the world far easier for the Templars to control. He also believed that this would strengthen the order itself. Some Templars agreed with him, while others did not, making Germain a pretty controversial figure within the French right. Eventually, Germain was expelled because of this, but we know the rest of the story thanks to Assassin's Creed Unity. Germain eventually returned and had his loyalists overthrow the order, and he took control of it. And if you look at the modern day storyline, Abstergo is definitely closer to Molay's vision than the Templars of his own time ever were. Rather than controlling the world mostly through kings and queens, the modern Templars have influence mainly through corporations and finances. Abstergo is a massive corporation, and according to its employee handbook, it was estimated that there were around 3 dozen Abstergo products in the average household. So in a weird way, Molay was right. Now heading back to Unity, at the end of the game, Germain wields Molay's Sword of Eden, and most people probably look at the sword as simply being a powerful piece of Eden that functions primarily as a weapon. It can fire laser beams, teleport its wielder, and even provide them with what seems to be echolocation or something. But in all actuality, the Sword of Eden that we see in Unity is only operating at a fraction of its true power or potential. And the way Germain wielded it was actually completely wrong. First, we need to go over the Sword of Eden itself. Molay's Sword of Eden requires two separate components to function properly and at its full power. The first is obviously the physical sword, while the second is something known as the heart. Now, this entire storyline is featured in the novel Assassin's Creed Heresy if you're interested. But getting back to it, the heart is a small sphere that is roughly the size of a walnut, so it's not big at all. In order for the sword to access all of its abilities and function at its full potential, the wielder needs to have the heart in close proximity to the sword. Ideally, the wielder should have both physically on them. The heart can even be inserted directly into the sword by unscrewing the hilt and placing it inside. And interestingly enough, this is actually how the modern day Templars eventually repaired the Sword of Eden. But that is a story for another day, and trust me, it's a good one. Molay understood that allowing both pieces of Eden to fall into their enemies' hands would have been terrible. So when the Templars were attacked, Molay kept the heart on him while ordering his advisor to hide the physical sword, exactly what we see in the game. This might actually explain why Thomas de Carnelione was able to survive a direct blast from the sword. Had the sword been operating at its full power, I highly doubt anyone would have survived a direct hit. After all, we've seen what other pieces of Eden are capable of. Germain obviously did not possess the heart. Molay actually hid it in the cell he was imprisoned in. This probably contributed to his defeat at the hands of Arnaud Dorian and Elise. Towards the end of the fight, we see the sword acting strangely, and according to the Assassin's Creed Unity novelization, Germain could not fully control the sword, suggesting that it wasn't functioning properly. But this is again only half the story. In order for someone to properly wield the sword, the user needs to possess a heart of their own. And no, I'm not talking about another piece of Eden. The wielder needs to come from a place of genuine goodness and belief. They need to want to inspire others, become a beacon of hope, and unite others for good. When someone with those qualities possesses the physical heart, the sword becomes what it's actually meant to be. It becomes a tool capable of inspiring and uniting people, kind of similar to the Apple of Eden without the brainwashing. It can get people to fight and believe in a good cause. And it also unlocks more abilities which make the piece of Eden far more powerful, despite that not being the primary purpose of this specific sword. The Sword of Eden was meant to unite people behind something good and greater than themselves. We actually see this with Joan of Arc. From what we've seen, Joan is the only person who clearly wielded the sword in this way, though I believe Molay likely did the same, considering he understood the importance of the sword and the heart. He also clearly had the necessary Isu DNA to wield it due to him being a sage. This again mirrors Altair. Altair also possessed a piece of Eden, and at the end of his life chose to lock it away for the greater good. In Assassin's Creed Revelations, we see him place the apple into a safe type mechanism, where he briefly hesitates before locking it away. The Revelations novelization gives us more information, explaining that once Altair activated it, there would be no way to retrieve the apple for centuries. In the book, it's sort of portrayed as Altair finally overcoming his obsession. Both Molay and Altair understood the danger and potential of the pieces of Eden that they wielded, and both ultimately chose to put it aside and lock them away. The final major topic I want to talk about is a theory of mine, that Molay was the one who actually founded the Inner Sanctum of the Templar Order. The Inner Sanctum is a group of 9 Templars that serve as part of the central governing body of the order, and to put their position into perspective, they are far superior to Grand Masters and Master Templars. If they were to appear as antagonists in a main Assassin's Creed game and Ubisoft portrayed them accurately, I don't think the protagonist would realistically be able to hunt them down without a tremendous amount of luck, preparation, and strategy. In fact, there's only one playable protagonist who has ever killed members of the Inner Sanctum, being Desmond Miles. He eliminated both Daniel Cross and Warren Vidic. Cross likely would have won, but he sort of went insane, and that's why Desmond was able to ultimately defeat him. And with Vidic, Desmond sort of cheated and used the apple. The members of the Inner Sanctum are some of the smartest, most skilled, and most experienced Templars in the entire world. In the modern day, many of them oversee major divisions of Abstergo, including historical research, operations, and finance. So why do I believe Molay founded it? Earlier in this video, I mentioned that while Molay was imprisoned, he passed down his knowledge of the Isu, the Templars, the Assassins, and basically everything he knew to 9 of his most trusted men. He then tasked these individuals with ensuring that the Templar Order would survive after his death. And this is where things get very interesting. The classified section of the Abstergo Employee Handbook that's only meant for the Templars specifically mentions that Molay picked 9 members. The Revelations database also refers to 9 members that Molay picked, and I couldn't find any historical evidence that Molay maintained relationships with people in prison. So it's clear that Ubisoft is continuing to say 9 for a reason. Obviously, these 9 individuals would have possessed an enormous amount of knowledge, especially when you remember that Molay was a sage, and could pass down even more knowledge than the Templars probably even knew of. So naturally, these 9 people would have became the leaders of whatever remained of the Templar Order. And remember, at this point the public order was basically extinct. And there's another interesting detail from the modern day. In the Templar Inner Sanctum room, there's a life-size portrait of Jacques de Molay, and in the novel Assassin's Creed Heresy, Molay is described as the greatest Templar Grand Master that ever lived during an Inner Sanctum meeting. Not to mention, in the book, the Inner Sanctum is described as the heart or the center of the Templar Order, and we already know how important the heart is in Molay's story. Also, he tasked his 9 men with ensuring the survival of the Order. How do we know when something is dead? When its heart stops beating. And most importantly, as far as we know, the Inner Sanctum did not exist before Molay, at least right now. So if I had to guess when the Inner Sanctum was founded, I think this is probably the most logical point in time. Molay knew that the Order was about to be destroyed and entrusted 9 of his most loyal followers with preserving the cause. Those 9 men would then become the foundation that would eventually evolve into the Inner Sanctum. And honestly, when you put everything together, it makes Molay's legacy pretty ridiculous. He was the Grand Master of the Order at its height. He was a sage with the knowledge of the Isu. He wrote a codex that would influence Templars centuries after his death. He developed reforms that would eventually shape the philosophy of future Templars. He understood the power of the Pieces of Eden. He ensured that the Order survived even after most of it was destroyed. And if my theory is correct, he may have even created the foundation for what would eventually become the center of the Templars' leadership. Altair reformed the assassins and ensured their survival. Molay essentially did the same thing for the Templars. The biggest difference is that Altair lived long enough to see his reforms be applied, while Molay did not and was forced to watch his order collapse. Yet, even when he was imprisoned, tortured, and ultimately burned alive, he put the Order above himself. And when he had the chance to live, he chose the Order. And that's why by the 21st century, he was considered the greatest Templar Grand Master in history. In my opinion, he's not just the greatest Grand Master, but the greatest Templar in history. He is the Templar equivalent to Altair. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to drop a like and let me know if you have any thoughts or questions in the comments. I'm planning on making other lore videos similar to this one with Joan of Arc and even an Abstergo employee that went insane and believed that he was Arno Dorian. So if you're interested, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss those. Thanks for watching, and as usual, have a great rest of your day.